Welcome all viewers to our channel. We are glad to see you here, where we share amazing stories from people's lives. Each of you is important to us, and we will be interested to know what country and city you are from. Please write about it in the comments. Now let's move on to our first story. Tamara was born in a stuffy but vibrant neighborhood on the outskirts of a large city. This neighborhood, known for its tight quarters and busy streets, was a place where life bustled from early morning until late at night. Music played loudly, street vendors shouted, and children played on the sidewalks, oblivious to passing cars. But behind the noisy facade were real problems: poverty, high crime rates, and lack of opportunities for most residents. Tamara grew up in a small two-room apartment with her mother and younger brother. Their father left when Tamara was only 5 years old, and her mother became the only source of income for the family. She worked several jobs at once: a cleaner at school, a cook in a cafe, and a part-time seamstress at home to make ends meet. Tamara saw from childhood how hard her mother's life was and decided for herself that her life would be different. From an early age, Tamara was characterized by a lively mind and perseverance. Her mother often said, "You, Tamara, will be the first in our family to graduate from college. You're smart, and the world will open up before you. Just don't give up." These words became her personal credo. Despite the noise around her, she found secluded corners where she could hide with a book. Reading became her favorite pastime, her escape from reality. She liked to fantasize about life outside her neighborhood, about tall office buildings where people wore strict suits and worked at big desks. "When I grow up," she told her brother Mark, "I'll have a study with a huge window where I can see the whole city." But reality constantly reminded of itself. At school, Tamara faced ridicule from her classmates. They mocked her dreams, calling them stupid. "Who needs your books?" one of the boys once said. "People like us don't become big bosses." Those words hurt her heart, but she didn't let herself break down. Instead, she decided to prove him wrong. By high school, Tamara had become one of the best students. Her mom was proud of her, but she often said, "Education is good, but the world is not fair. You're going to face hardships just because you're black. You have to work twice as hard as everyone else to get what others get for nothing." Those words echoed in her head every time she sat down to study for her exams. When it came time to go to college, Tamara faced another challenge. Despite her good grades, her family had no money to pay for her education. She received a grant that covered some of the costs, but the rest she had to earn on her own. Tamara took a job as a waitress at a night cafe and studied during the day. There were times when she could barely stand on her feet from fatigue, but she knew she had no choice. In college, she first encountered a world that was different from her usual environment. Among her classmates, there were children of rich parents who looked down on her. But Tamara tried to ignore that. She wasn't here to make friends, but to get an education that would open the door to a world of opportunity. Her dreams began to take clearer shape. She saw herself in a big office, working on important projects, negotiating and making decisions that could change the course of events. It was a vision that kept her going through the toughest moments. But life taught her a lesson again. A few months before graduating from college, her mother became seriously ill. The illness took a huge toll, and Tamara had to take another job to pay for her medication. Her schedule became unbearable: night shifts, morning lectures, and constant worry for her mother. Despite this, she graduated with honors. Graduation day was a symbol of victory for her. When she went on stage to receive her diploma, her mother, who had already recovered a bit, sat in the front row and applauded the most. Tamara looked at her and realized that everything she had done was not only for herself but also for her family. This victory gave her the feeling that she could cope with any difficulties. Now she was ready for the next step, to the world of big offices and strict suits. But what she didn't know yet was that there was a road ahead of her, full of new challenges that would require even more strength and perseverance. After graduating from college, Tamara anxiously searched for her first job. She sent out dozens of resumes, had several interviews, which ended with polite refusals. At some point, she began to doubt that her dream of an office career would become a reality. But one day she received a call from a company whose name she had immediately written down on the cover of her old notebook. "We are ready to offer you the position of assistant administrator," said the voice in the phone. Thank you, I won't let you down, Tamara replied, trying to hide the excited tremor in her voice. It was a small but important victory. For the first time in her life, she felt that her hard work was paying off. The next day, she bought a strict black suit that didn't fit perfectly, but still gave her confidence. Tamara walked to the office with her head held high, her heart filled with hope. When she entered the building, she was greeted by a marble-floored lobby, huge windows, and a stern receptionist who gave Tamara a cursory glance. She was escorted to the department where she was to work. The room was simple, open workstations with computers, employees dressed in expensive suits, and bosses sitting in separate offices. Tamara felt a little out of place, but her desire to prove her worth was stronger. The first few days were spent familiarizing herself with the rules of the company. Her boss was Ms. Wilson, a stern and serious middle-aged woman who looked at Tamara through thin glasses, as if assessing her every move. We do things by the book here. If you want to stay with the company, you have to work quickly and accurately, she said at the first meeting. Tamara nodded. She was ready. However, she soon encountered her first difficulties. Her seemingly simple tasks required attention to details that she had not noticed before. Every document had to be executed without a single mistake. Every meeting had to be perfectly organized. Her classmates in college had taught her the theory, but no one had warned her how difficult it would be to survive in a corporate culture. It was even more difficult to interact with colleagues. Tamara quickly noticed that she was the only black person in the department. Her predominantly white coworkers seemed out of her reach. They laughed at jokes she didn't understand, discussed vacations in expensive countries and weekends on yachts. When she tried to talk to someone, they listened with polite but obvious aloofness. Andrew, a high-status employee who was always the center of attention, stood out. He was charismatic and confident, but every remark he made to Tamara sounded condescending. "You're from college with a grant, aren't you?" he asked once, studying her with his gaze. "Yes," Tamara replied, trying not to show embarrassment. "That's great. There are a lot of opportunities like that now." His smile was cold, and Tamara realized he didn't consider her an equal. The work was getting harder and harder. Ms. Wilson gave her more and more tasks, expecting Tamara to handle them without error. Sometimes she had to stay late in the office to finish reports or prepare materials for morning meetings. Her coworkers went home at 6 sharp, and she stayed at her desk until the last of the lights went out. Her strength was that she never complained. Deep down, Tamara knew, to be recognized, she had to be twice as good as the others. One day, while preparing a major presentation for a company director, Ms. Wilson had Tamara gather all the data and put it into a slideshow. This was her opportunity to show what she could do. She spent 3 nights at the computer, checking every detail. When the presentation was over, Ms. Wilson nodded dryly. "Not bad, Tamara. Keep it up." To some, it might have seemed like faint praise, but to her, those words meant more than anything. However, her success did not go unnoticed. Her colleagues began to treat her even more coldly, and Andrew once made a loud joke. "We have a new star in the office. Maybe Ms. Wilson will give you her chair now." The laughter that rang out in response filled her soul with bitterness, but she only clenched her teeth and continued working. Nevertheless, every day Tamara was convinced that she was on the right track. She was no longer the girl from a poor neighborhood who dreamed of a career. She was on that path, even if it was much harder than she had imagined. One day she was alone with Ms. Wilson as she studied another report. At one point, the supervisor looked up and suddenly said, "You know, Tamara, I started out as an administrative assistant too. It's not easy, but you're doing fine." These words, though spoken in a dry tone, were a sign to her that she was moving in the right direction. But Tamara knew that the struggle had only just begun. The world she entered was full of unwritten rules and barriers that she had to overcome. She decided for herself that she would work, study, and achieve her goals, no matter what. The first months of work turned into a series of challenges for Tamara, each of which seemed more difficult than the last. She came to the office earlier than everyone else and left later than everyone else to catch up on her knowledge and cope with the numerous tasks. Her desk was always cluttered with documents, and her computer blinked with reminders of deadlines. One of the greatest difficulties was the pressure that seemed to come from all sides. Colleagues who could have been her allies remained indifferent or even hostile. Tamara noticed that when Andrew or one of the old-timers in the office proposed an idea, it was always met with approval, even if it was far from perfect. But when Tamara dared to speak her mind, her words were often overlooked. "Okay, Tamara," one of the managers once said in a meeting, "we will take your suggestion into account, but let's focus on something more important now." That more important always turned out to be someone else's idea, and Tamara saw her input ignored, no matter how thoughtful it was. Her efforts were constantly questioned. Once, Ms. Wilson assigned her to prepare a financial report for a major company client. Tamara worked on it all week, going into detail, correcting data, and creating tables that could be understood at a glance. When she handed the report to Ms. Wilson, she took a quick look at it and remarked dryly, "All in all, not bad, but try to be more careful next time." Tamara felt a wave of indignation rising inside her. She'd spent days on this report, and even the minor flaws her boss had found didn't affect the big picture. She restrained herself, however, and simply nodded. "Of course, Miss Wilson." Tamara realized that she needed to do a better job to be noticed, but with each passing day, it seemed that her accomplishments went unseen. One of the most challenging tests was a project the company was launching for a new client. It was a task with a lot of moving parts. Meetings had to be coordinated, tasks had to be tracked, and communication with the client had to be maintained. Usually such projects were assigned to more experienced employees, but this time Ms. Wilson chose Tamara. "You said you wanted to prove yourself," she said. "Here's your chance." At first glance, it seemed like a huge opportunity, but already on the first day, Tamara realized what a task it was. No one wanted to share information with her, and most of the tasks that used to be done by others were now on her shoulders. "It's not that hard. Just watch the schedule," Andrew said, throwing her a perplexed look when she asked him to explain the nuances of one of the documents. The receptionist refused to help her organize the calls, saying that it was not her job. The rest of the staff seemed oblivious to her existence. Nevertheless, Tamara did not give up. She broke tasks into parts, made lists, and constantly checked against deadlines. Every evening when she left the office, she felt that she had done everything possible not to fail. When the project was finally completed, the client was pleased, but instead of acknowledging her work, Ms. Wilson said, "Good job, team. You all did a great job." Tamara sat in the corner of the room, watching Andrew and the others being congratulated, even though everyone knew she was the one who had coordinated the project. One day, coming home after a particularly hard day, Tamara had her first doubts. She was sitting on the bus, clutching a folder of papers that needed to be finished during the night. Her head was down, and her shoulders seemed heavier than usual. "Why am I trying if no one notices it?" she thought. These thoughts haunted her all evening. She looked at the picture of her son Malik on her desk at work and reminded herself why she was doing all this. He deserves a better future. Her mom deserves peace, and she herself deserved more than she was being offered right now. "They may not notice me now, but I will make them see who I am," she whispered to herself in front of the mirror before going to bed. Despite the difficulties, Tamara still began to notice small changes. She learned to work under pressure, became more confident in her actions. Her spreadsheets and reports became more accurate. Her ideas, though not immediately accepted, began to sound more confident. She also found a few allies in the office. Lucy from accounting, for example, who once offered to help with a project. "I can see how hard you're trying," she said. "If you need help, just say so." It was a breath of fresh air for Tamara. She realized that even in this world full of competition and snobbery, there were people who were ready to support her. But the difficulties still remained. Tamara knew that her road to recognition would be long and thorny. She was ready to fight further, but somewhere in the back of her mind, she felt that this office was only the first stage of her journey. She was not going to stop there. For Tamara, the day began long before the first rays of the sun touched the horizon. Her alarm clock would ring at 5:30 a.m., and she would get up to prepare breakfast for her son Malik. Mornings in their small apartment were always filled with sounds: the sizzle of eggs in a frying pan, the sound of water running from the faucet, the voice of the radio broadcasting news or music. Malik was 8 years old, and he already understood that his mother was an extraordinary woman. He saw how she was torn between work, household chores, and caring for him. Nevertheless, she always tried to make their morning special. Do you have a math test today? Tamara asked, placing a plate of his favorite pancakes in front of her son. Yes, Malik nodded, vigorously pouring syrup over them. Tamara sat down next to him to go over the examples with him. Her voice was soft when she explained how to add fractions or solve an equation. Even if she couldn't always remember how to solve the problems herself, her patience and willingness to help always found a way to make studying enjoyable. You'll do fine, kid, she said, putting her hand on his shoulder. You're smart, and I believe in you. After Malik left for school, Tamara's second shift began, cleaning the house. She collected scattered toys, loaded the laundry, and quickly washed the dishes. Her house was modest, but always clean, because Tamara believed that order helped keep harmony in the family. When the house was in order, she would change into a strict suit and head to work. Despite her fatigue, she always looked impeccable. Tamara knew that the world judged her not only by her results, but also by her appearance. After work, she would rush home to spend the evening with Malik. He would meet her at the door with notebooks and questions. Mom, can you help me with my history project? He asked, holding up the assignment sheet. Of course, little boy. Let's see what needs to be done, Tamara answered, though fatigue was already coming over her in waves. They sat at the table together, cutting pictures out of old magazines, drawing maps or making presentations. Sometimes they laughed at the awkward drawings, and sometimes Malik fell asleep right at his textbooks. But for Tamara, it was not a burden. She knew that these moments were the most important in her life. She saw in Malik a future for which she was ready to give her best. However, in addition to caring for her son, Tamara had to deal with financial difficulties. Her salary was barely enough to pay the mortgage, utilities, and school fees. She carefully planned every dollar, making shopping lists and watching for discounts. Sometimes she had to give up something for herself to buy Malik a new shirt or school supplies. Mom, why didn't you buy yourself a new coat? He once asked, noticing that her old one looked worn out. My coat is still good, she smiled. And you need a new coat. Her sacrifices did not go unnoticed. Malik grew up to be an understanding and kind boy who appreciated everything his mother did for him. However, even the strongest woman sometimes gets weak. Tamara cried many times at night when Malik was already asleep. She wondered, was she raising her son right? Is she doing enough for his happiness? Her heart was torn with guilt when she couldn't give him as much time as she wanted. There were times when he would ask her to come to a school concert or sporting event, and she couldn't leave work. One day he said, I still know you're with me even if you're not in the audience. Those words simultaneously warmed and broke her heart. But in those moments when she saw Malik smiling or proudly showing her his grades or telling her about his dreams of becoming a scientist, Tamara realized it was not all for nothing. Mom, do you ever get tired? He asked one day, sitting next to her on the couch. Sometimes, she answered honestly, hugging him. But you know what helps? What? You, your smile, your progress. You're my greatest strength. Malik nodded and hugged her tightly. Tamara knew that the road ahead would be difficult. She had to combine her career, raising her son, and fighting for justice in a world that was not always kind to her. But her love for Malik was an unstoppable force that helped her overcome the most difficult obstacles. Every day was a marathon for Tamara. In recent months, however, this marathon had begun to seem endless. The influx of tasks in the office turned into an avalanche, and, as was often the case, most of the load fell on her shoulders. Tamara was used to being the one to take on difficult tasks, but now it seemed to her that her efforts were not only ignored, but taken for granted. One of the projects required round-the-clock attention. The company had a contract with a major client, and the success of the deal depended on the timely preparation of reports, analysis, and presentations. It was a task for an entire team, but Ms. Wilson, with her usual indifference, decided that Tamara should handle it. You've proven yourself, she said, handing Tamara a folder marked urgent. I know you can do this. There was not an ounce of gratitude in her boss's voice, only a dry expectation of fulfillment. Tamara realized that it was impossible to refuse. Working overtime had become an everyday occurrence for her. She was one of the last people in the office when the rest of the staff went home. The hum of computers and neon lights were her constant companions. One day she walked out of the office building late at night. The rain was starting to drizzle and the streets were getting empty. Tamara felt her body screaming with fatigue, but her mind was spinning. There was more work waiting for her at home. Malik needed help with a project, and the reports for tomorrow's meeting hadn't even started yet. When she got home, Malik was already asleep. She quietly went into his room, covered him with a warm blanket, and exhaled as she watched his face. "For you, baby," she whispered before turning back to her laptop. The hours dragged on. Each digit on the clock screen reminded her of how much time she had already spent on reports. There were no holidays or weekends in her world. Even when she had rare moments of rest, the thought of more to do pounded in her head. Tamara felt trapped. Her colleagues seemed to go home with a light heart, managing to live a full life. But for her, work became not just a necessity, but an endless race in which she could not afford to stop. "You have to work harder if you want to get noticed," Tamara often told herself, sitting at her computer late at night. But with each passing day, her strength waned. She began to notice how irritable she was becoming, even toward Malik. One day when he asked her to help with a task, she responded sharply, "Malik, I'm busy. Figure it out for yourself." Her words sounded harsher than she intended. When she saw the hurt look on her son's face, she immediately regretted it. "I'm sorry, kid. Mommy's just tired," she said, hugging him. These moments became more and more frequent, and Tamara began to realize that not only her job, but her personal life was beginning to crumble. Late one night as she was preparing another report, her phone rang. It was Lucy from accounting. "Tamara, you can't work like this anymore," she said. "You're a human being, not a machine. You have to stop." Tamara smiled, though there was bitterness in her voice. "Stop? If I stop, then who's going to do all this?" Lucy was silent for a moment, then added, "I know how you feel, but believe me, it's not worth your health. Think about you and Malik." These words hurt Tamara. She thought about how her constant tension was affecting her son. One day, as deadlines clamped down with suffocating force, Tamara felt like she couldn't take it anymore. She sat at her desk in her office, surrounded by papers and her laptop. Her head was spinning and her hands were shaking. "I need some air," she whispered and headed for the exit. She stood outside, looking up at the gray sky, and felt a heaviness come over her shoulders. "Why do I have to suffer so much?" she asked herself aloud. At that moment, she realized her life could not continue at this pace. The next day, despite her fatigue, Tamara decided to talk to Ms. Wilson. "I need to spread the load," she said firmly. "I can't keep working like this." Ms. Wilson raised an eyebrow and replied dryly, "If you can't handle it, maybe this job isn't for you." These words sounded like a spit in the face, but Tamara was no longer afraid. She decided that she would look for other ways. Her life, her health, and her son were more important. In the world of the corporate office, where success is often defined not only by effort, but also by how that effort is perceived by those around her, Tamara quickly realized that her path would be much more difficult than others. Despite her success, organization, and hard work, she found time and time again that her accomplishments went unnoticed, or worse, were attributed to someone else. One day during a monthly meeting, Tamara presented her project, Humiliation, a detailed plan to improve the department's performance. She had worked out every detail, from assigning responsibilities to ways to reduce costs. Her presentation was clear and compelling. When she finished, there was a pause in the room. Ms. Wilson quickly moved on to another question, as if ignoring what had been said. A week later, her colleague Josh, a white male with much less experience, presented an almost identical project. He used her ideas, changing only a few details, but this time he was applauded. "Great job, Josh," said one of the managers. "This is exactly the kind of initiative we need." Tamara sat at the end of the table, feeling her heart clench. This was her work, her ideas, her sleepless nights. This was not a one-time phenomenon. Every time Tamara tried to make a name for herself, she ran into an invisible wall. Her offers were rejected, her contributions were devalued, and her efforts were overshadowed. One day she tried to talk to Miss Wilson directly. "I feel like my ideas and projects are underappreciated," she said, trying to remain calm. "I want to understand what I'm doing wrong." Ms. Wilson looked at her with a slight chuckle. "Tamara, you're overreacting. In the corporate world, you have to be patient. Maybe you just don't have the charisma to take your ideas seriously." Those words didn't just hurt Tamara, they left a scar. Among her colleagues, Tamara felt isolated. Most preferred to stick to their own circles, and she was often left alone during lunch breaks or uninvited to informal meetings after work. There was only one person who reached out to her, Lucy from accounting. "I see the way you're being treated, and it's not fair," Lucy said one day over a cup of coffee. "But you know, you're strong. They are afraid of you because you are smarter and harder working than they are." These words were a comfort to Tamara, but consolation didn't solve the problem. Tamara started looking for ways to change the situation. She read books on self-presentation, attended leadership seminars, and tried to speak up more loudly. At the next meeting, she raised her hand and proposed a new idea. "I believe we can improve our performance if we redistribute some tasks," she said firmly. But as soon as she finished, Josh interrupted her. "It sounds good, but it's too complicated to implement," he said, and the whole table nodded in agreement. Tamara felt everything boiling inside. She wanted to object, but stopped herself. When she returned home, Tamara stared out the window for a long time. Questions sounded in her head. Why was her voice not being heard? Why did she have to prove her worth over and over again when others could do it effortlessly? She recalled conversations with her mother. "People will always try to belittle you because of who you are," her mother had said. "But you have to know your worth." Those words became her inner anchor. Instead of continuing to fight for recognition within the company, Tamara decided to focus on what she could control. She started keeping a diary of her accomplishments. This not only helped her keep track of her progress, but also reminded her that her hard work was not wasted. She also began looking for new opportunities. By attending professional events, she met people who valued her experience and drive for development. One evening when Tamara was telling Malik how her day had gone, he listened intently and then said, "Mom, you know you're tough, don't you?" Those words made her smile. "Why do you think that?" she asked. "Because you don't give up, even when things are bad." These words were a reminder to her that she is not only fighting for herself, but also setting an example for her son. Tamara knew that the struggle for recognition is not only her personal battle, it is a struggle for the right to be heard and respected in a society where her voice is often silenced. She decided that she would no longer remain silent. If her merits were ignored here, she would find a place where they would be appreciated. Tamara started an ordinary day, unaware that it would be a turning point for her. The morning was as hectic as ever, helping Malik pack his briefcase for school, answering a few urgent emails on the phone, and grabbing a cup of coffee and running out of the house. When she entered the office, her coworkers were talking excitedly. She caught a glimpse of Josh and a group of coworkers glancing at her, then quickly turned away. Something was wrong. Tamara felt a slight uneasiness, but she put it down to her own fatigue. Her mind was spinning with plans for the day. Meeting with the marketing department, analyzing reports, and preparing proposals for a new client. She barely had time to put her bag on the table before Ms. Wilson approached her. "Tamara, Mr. Harris wants to see you in his office." His heart clenched. Mr. Harris rarely called in employees, and it usually didn't bode well. When she entered his office, he was sitting behind a massive desk, smiling in a way that made that smile look more like a sneer. "Have a seat, Tamara," he said, pointing to the chair opposite. She sat down carefully, trying to remain calm. "As you know, our company always strives for efficiency and high standards," he began, crossing his arms across his chest. "Unfortunately, sometimes difficult decisions have to be made." He held out a piece of paper to her. "This is your dismissal order." The words sounded cold and detached. Tamara stared at the document, not believing her eyes. "What?" she exhaled. "Are you serious?" "Whatever." Mr. Harris grinned, as if enjoying her confusion. "You are, of course, entitled to know the reason. But frankly, it doesn't matter. We've simply decided that we no longer need your services." Her voice shook with emotion. "I've worked here for so many years. I've done more than I've been asked to do. Do you know how many nights I spent working?" He shrugged. "It's business, Tamara. Nothing personal." But the worst of it all happened when she got up to leave. Mr. Harris laughed loudly, haughtily, as if it were all just a joke. "Good luck finding a new job," he added as if mocking. Those words and that laugh were the last straw. All her efforts, her sleepless nights, her patience, everything collapsed at that moment. As she left the office, Tamara felt as if the whole world had crumbled beneath her feet. She walked through the office, ignoring the surprised looks of her colleagues. When she got into the car, the tears finally came. She sobbed against the steering wheel, unable to cope with her feelings of humiliation, resentment, and despair. Questions flashed through her mind. Why? Why her? Why, despite her best efforts, had she just been thrown away like an unwanted thing? Tamara came home earlier than usual. Malik, who had just returned from school, noticed her depressed state. "Mom, what's wrong?" She looked at him, trying not to show her tears. "It's going to be okay, baby," she said, hugging him. But there was a storm raging in her soul. She knew she couldn't afford to be weak. For Malik's sake, for their future, she had to do something. Late at night, after Malik had fallen asleep, Tamara sat at her laptop. She thought about everything that had happened, about all the years of labor and humiliation. Her fingers froze over the keyboard. She decided to write an article, an honest story about what she had been through. She began to write, pouring out pain, anger, and resentment. "If I keep quiet, this will continue," she told herself. "I have to tell my story." She described everything: how she was ignored, how her ideas were stolen, how she was humiliated because of her skin color, and finally how she was fired. The next morning, she posted the article on social media. Tamara did not expect it to generate such a response. The post was actively reposted, commented, and discussed. "You are an incredibly strong woman," they wrote to her. "We are with you. This is not fair, and we will help you get justice." Her story began to gain momentum. People from all walks of life, from journalists to activists, began to offer her help. A few days later, Tamara's story was on the front pages of the news. The company she worked for was under public pressure. People demanded justice, and Mr. Harris had to justify himself. "It's a misunderstanding," he said on camera, but his words sounded unconvincing. For Tamara, this day was the beginning of a new phase. Her voice was finally heard. The drive home that evening was like a fog. Tamara sat behind the wheel, almost oblivious to her surroundings. Cars passed by, headlights blurred before her eyes, and Mr. Harris's laughter sounded in her head. She felt her footing disappear beneath her. When she opened the door to her apartment, it was silent. Malik was at a neighbor's house. The boys often played together after school. It gave Tamara a few minutes of solitude, but this time the loneliness was weighing on her. She threw the bag on the floor and sank down onto the couch. Her chest constricted, and tears ran down her cheeks. Tamara cried as she hadn't cried in years, loudly, unrestrainedly, venting all the anger, resentment, and powerlessness she had accumulated. Her thoughts darted from one scene to the next. Her first paycheck, which she proudly spent on textbooks for Malik. Night shifts at the computer as she comforted herself with the thought that this labor was not in vain. Her son's smile when she bought him a new backpack for school because the old one was all worn out. Everything seemed meaningless now. "What did I try for?" she whispered into the emptiness of the room. She opened her laptop, hoping to distract herself, but the screen only reminded her of the dismissal order. That piece of paper Mr. Harris had thrown in her face seemed to be lying in front of her again. The sound of the key in the lock made her wince. She quickly wiped away her tears, but her face was still tear-stained. Malik ran into the apartment, full of energy. "Hi, Mom," he shouted, dropping his backpack at the door. "You're early today." Tamara tried to smile, but her smile was strained. "Yeah, a little earlier than usual. How was your day?" "Awesome. We played soccer and I scored 2 goals." He sat down next to her, noticing her red eyes. "Mom, have you been crying?" Tamara froze. She didn't want her son to see her weak, but it would be wrong to lie to him. "Yes, baby," she said, trying to speak calmly. "It's been a rough day." Malik put his hand on her shoulder. "It's going to be okay, Mom. You're strong." Those simple words made her feel a rush of tears again. When Malik went to bed, Tamara was alone with her thoughts again. She sat in the kitchen with a cup of tea that had long since cooled. Her mind was filled with fears. How is she going to pay her rent? What will she tell people if they find out she was fired? How do you explain to Malik that things are going to change now? She lifted her head and looked at the photograph on the shelf. It showed her and Malik, still small, on a picnic in the park. Tamara remembered that day, how he had laughed playing in the grass, how she had promised herself she would do everything she could to give him a better future. "I can't give up," she whispered. Thinking back on her most difficult moments, Tamara realized that she had always found the strength to move on. She remembered her mother telling her as a child, "The world will not be fair to you, Tamara. You will fall, but it's important to always get back up." Those words echoed in her head like a reminder that she wasn't alone. She pulled out the notebook she usually used for work and started writing. It wasn't a work strategy or a meeting plan. She was writing for herself. "I am strong. I will survive. This is not the end. It's a chance to start over." Those simple words became her mantra. The next morning, Tamara decided she wasn't going to hide from the world. She started looking for job openings, updated her resume, and contacted a few acquaintances who could help. But the most important step was her decision to write the article. She realized that her story was not just her own personal tragedy, but an example of what many women, especially Black women, face. When she finished writing, she felt a little lighter. She felt that her voice was her main weapon, and she was ready to use it. In the morning, Malik came up to her with a drawing of her with a smile on her face. "That's you, Mom. When you're happy," he said. The gesture reminded Tamara that she had no right to give up. Her strength is not only her struggle, but also her love for her son. Saturday morning, Tamara woke up with a heavy weight on her soul. The new reality had not yet fully settled in her mind. She'd lost her job, the stability she'd spent years building, all because of bias and indifference. But she knew she could do something more. Sitting down at the kitchen table, Tamara opened her laptop. The screen was white with a blank document and the cursor blinking, as if nudging her to take the first step. She inhaled deeply and began to write. The words flowed nonstop. She described everything from how she got her first job, her determination to prove her worth in a team where she was one of the few Black employees. "I worked twice as hard as it took to prove that I was worthy to be seen not as a quota, but as a professional. I endured humiliation, being ignored, but I kept going anyway. I thought that hard work would change the opinion of me, but the reality turned out to be different." She described how her ideas were appropriated by others, how her successes were ignored, and how she was eventually fired for no good reason. "The final straw was the laughter of my principal, who showed me that, to him, I was not a person, but an object of ridicule." Tamara didn't limit herself to her personal story. She raised broader issues about systemic discrimination, about how many Black women have to work in conditions that break them, about how their roles as mothers are perceived not as strength, but as weakness. When the text was finished, she felt light. Tamara uploaded the article to a popular platform for personal stories and clicked the publish button. She didn't expect her story to get such a response. Within an hour, the first comments appeared. People wrote, "This is so similar to my experience. Thank you for sharing. Your words touched me to the core. Hang in there, you are strong. I'm ready to support you. This is unacceptable." Her story began to spread across social media. Posts with her story appeared on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram feeds. People shared her experience, adding their thoughts. Throughout the day, her phone literally exploded with notifications. Strangers wrote to her, sharing their stories or offering help. She even received messages from journalists who wanted to interview her. Tamara was stunned. Her voice, which had been muffled for so long, was finally being heard. She was particularly moved by a message from a woman who worked in a similar position at another company. "I read your story and realized that you speak for all of us. I went through the same thing, but I didn't have the courage to tell you about it. You are an inspiration." Those words gave Tamara strength. Even her old friends, whom she hadn't spoken to in a long time, reached out to her. "I'm proud of you," one of them, Jessica, said over the phone. "You've always been strong, but what you've done now is incredible." Malik, not fully comprehending the magnitude of what was happening, noticed that his mom was smiling more. He walked up to her as she sat at the computer and asked, "Mom, are you going to be famous?" Tamara laughed for the first time in days. "No, baby, I just want the world to be a little better." On the third day after publication, the article hit the main pages of news sites. People started leaving reviews on the page of the company where Tamara worked. The comments were harsh. "How could you allow such treatment? The injustice you have allowed to happen will not go unnoticed. The company's management was forced to respond. They issued an official statement saying that they would launch an internal investigation. But that wasn't enough. The internet demanded justice. Among the many messages Tamara received was one from the head of a small startup company. Your skills and your resilience speak for themselves. We would like to invite you for an interview if you are ready to consider new opportunities, the letter said. It was the first ray of hope. That night, while reading another supportive comment, Tamara looked over at Malik, who was drawing something at his desk. Mom, look, it's you, the superhero, he said, showing the drawing. The piece of paper featured a picture of Tamara wearing a superhero cape with the caption, "My mom is the strongest." Her eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of joy. Tamara never imagined that her story would become such a powerful catalyst for change. When she woke up the next day, she discovered that her article wasn't just popular. It had gone viral. Her phone vibrated incessantly. Notifications of comments, reposts, messages. Tamara was surprised to see that her story was being retold in different parts of the world. Social media was filled with support. People shared similar stories, celebrating her courage and expressing outrage at the injustice she faced. Your story inspired me to share mine. Thank you for not being afraid to speak your truth. We're standing up for you, Tamara. You're not alone. It's not just about you, it's about all of us. You gave us a voice, a pen. Even those who had not had experienced such discrimination before were struck by its power. Popular bloggers, celebrities, and public figures began to share her story. A few days later, Tamara received a message that changed everything. It was from an attorney specializing in workplace discrimination cases. Tamara, your termination violates labor rights laws. If you are ready, I would like to represent you. She questioned whether to start a fight with her former employer, but knew that her story had already transcended her life. It had become a symbol for many other women who might never have dared to come forward. Another surprise was a letter from one of her former coworkers. It was from Sarah, a white woman who had previously tried to stay out of the way to avoid incurring Mr. Harris's wrath. I'm ashamed I didn't support you sooner. If you need a testimony about what went on in the office, I'm willing to tell the truth. Sarah became Tamara's first real ally in her struggle. At the same time, Tamara was flooded with job offers. Companies of different sizes and industries expressed their desire to cooperate with her. We admire your resilience. Join our team. Your values and skills are a perfect fit for us. One proposal in particular struck a chord with Tamara. It was a startup founded by an African-American woman who created a company to support women in similar situations. Tamara, I know what it's like to be invisible. Let's work together to create a place where no one feels that way. The offer seemed more than just a bomb. It seemed like a chance to change the world. Along with job offers, Tamara also received many messages from people willing to help financially. We can't allow you to be left without a roof over your head. Someone even created a crowdfunding campaign to cover her mortgage. In a few days, they managed to raise a sum that exceeded all expectations. Tamara felt overwhelmed. She didn't ask for help, but people saw her struggle as something more than a personal tragedy. It became a symbol of solidarity. Now, with an army of support behind her, Tamara sprang into action. She contacted a lawyer to formally file a complaint against Mr. Harris and the company. Her story continued to attract media attention, and the pressure on the company's management was increasing daily. In the meantime, she began discussing the terms of a new partnership with one of the companies that had offered her a job. However, Tamara decided that first she wanted to meet the team to make sure that their values matched her own. Every day, Tamara received messages from people she had inspired. One woman wrote about how she dared to tell her boss about discrimination. A young man shared that her story helped him find the strength to start fighting for his rights at work. The power of community was a revelation to her. She realized that her voice could be part of something bigger. Malik, watching what was happening, became more and more proud of his mom. When he saw her interview on TV, his eyes lit up. "Mom, you're famous," he said with delight. Tamara laughed and hugged him. "It's not about fame, kid. It's about doing the right thing." Tamara realized that her journey was just beginning. She is no longer just a mother, an employee, or a victim of the system. She has become a symbol of hope for many who fight for justice. Her goal has been to create a space where people like her can find support, inspiration, and the opportunity to fight for their rights. When Tamara closed the car door and stepped onto the sidewalk on her first day of work in her new position, her heart was beating with extraordinary strength. She was not just returning to the world of work. She was entering it with new strength, with the knowledge that her struggle had not been in vain, that she had not only her past behind her, but also a huge army of people ready to support her every step of the way. Her new job wasn't just a chance, it was a new beginning. The startup she joined was founded by a woman who had gone through the same hardships as herself. Their goals and values coincided, and Tamara felt her desire for justice echoed in the team, where everyone worked not for career ambition, but for the cause. No one looked at skin color or gender. They valued hard work, talent, and personal qualities. The first weeks in the new place were not easy. Although Tamara felt in her element, the work required dedication and time, and she had to prove her worth in the new team. But this time it was different. Her ideas were not only accepted, but actively supported. Colleagues sought her opinion, respected her expertise, and knew she was contributing to the whole. No longer did she feel ignored or used. Tamara realized that despite all the hard road, all the years she felt invisible, she was always important. Her ideas and perseverance changed not only her life, but also the lives of her loved ones. Every day when she got up in the morning and got ready for work, she felt a sense of confidence. She knew that she was no longer just fighting for a place in the sun. She was now part of something that could be her new, brighter reality. The feeling Tamara felt was especially strong when she thought of those who had supported her in her darkest moments. The article she had written continued to take on a life of its own online. People were still sharing her experience, and she received more and more messages about how her story had inspired others to take action. One evening after a long day at work, she read a letter from a young woman who reported that, thanks to her article, she had decided not only to fight for her rights at work, but also to start her own business. Tamara, you gave me strength I didn't even know I had. You showed me that anything is possible if you believe in yourself and go forward despite everything. Tamara smiled, feeling proud that her experience could inspire others. With each new message, she felt her own outlook on life changing. After Tamara took a new job, her life found a balance that had previously seemed unattainable. Her relationship with Malik became even stronger. He became proud of his mom, and every night as they sat at dinner discussing the day, Tamara could feel their bond growing. Malik became more and more aware of what was happening in the world around him. He watched his mother work with such passion and confidence that he became proud of her accomplishments. Sometimes, when he couldn't solve a study question, she would give him advice, and he truly admired her wisdom. At the end of each day, as the two of them sat together on the couch, Tamara would hold Malik's hand and think that despite all the difficulties, they were now able to build a future together. Gradually, Tamara began to realize that she was no longer afraid of the future. Previously, she had always felt that her path would be limited, that she would have to constantly fight for her place. Now new horizons, new opportunities were opening up before her. And most importantly, she felt worthy of these opportunities. The company she worked for was gradually growing, and her professional skills were worth their weight in gold. She came up with some new ideas to improve processes within the company, and they resonated. Her leadership skills began to emerge, and her colleagues looked to her for advice and guidance. She also took part in several events dedicated to supporting women in business, and soon became an important figure in a network of entrepreneurs striving to create an inclusive workspace for all, regardless of background. Tamara was no longer the woman who began her journey with insecurity and fear. She had changed. Now she believed in herself and her strength. Sometimes she looked back and realized how much she had overcome. But what inspired her most was that she was standing on the threshold of a new life, a life where there was no room for fear and doubt. Every day she became more confident, and this new outlook on life was reflected in her relationships with her son, colleagues, and friends. Most importantly, she became a role model for others. Now that she was finding her new confidence and place in life, Tamara realized that her story was not complete. She was part of something bigger, not only because she had been through hardship, but also because she was willing to share her experiences, fight for justice, and help others. Her new path was just beginning, and she was ready to move forward, to new heights, to new victories, knowing that she was no longer alone. Behind her was the support of hundreds of people who shared her dream of a better world where racism and injustice had no place. Several months have passed since Tamara made the decision to fight for her rights and the rights of others. Her life has changed, but one important aspect has remained the same: the desire for justice. The legal battle with her former employer, Westfield Corp., had reached its climax. Tamara knew her path was not an easy one, and much depended on how events would unfold in court. All this time, she was not only strengthening her career and rebuilding her life, but also preparing for the final battle, which was to expose the system she had suffered under. She had many people who believed in her, and that support gave her strength. When Tamara's lawyer, Matthew Richards, announced that formal racial discrimination proceedings would begin, she couldn't believe her ears. This was the moment when her agonizing years on the bomb, ignored and humiliated, could finally be declared illegal. At the trial, Tamara took the stand as a witness. She told her story, not only about her work in the office, but also about how she, a woman, a mother, a Black woman, faced constant barriers that no one saw but herself. She talked about how her ideas and efforts were often ignored, how white colleagues received recognition, while she received only silence and humiliation. Her performance was filled with honesty and pain, but also with determination. She felt how important this moment was. This moment was not just for her, but for many people who have experienced similar difficulties. Soon an investigation began, and something incredible began to happen. Investigators began to uncover details about Mr. Harris's work and other company executives. It turned out that the system of oppression was deeper than anyone had realized. Mr. Harris not only racially discriminated against Tamara, but also used his power to maintain and reinforce inequality in the workforce. He gave bonuses and promotions only to his white subordinates, while women, Black employees, and those who did not fit his standard were not only discouraged, but sabotaged their advancement in his own way. A host of witnesses, including Sarah, who now supported Tamara, gave testimony that further strengthened the charges. Each new revelation seemed more shocking. The story of how Mr. Harris used his position to oppress people based on race and gender soon became nationally known. When the day came on which the verdict was to be announced, Tamara felt her heart beat faster. It was the moment of truth, the moment when she would see that her efforts, her struggle, her patience had not been in vain. She sat in the courtroom surrounded by supportive friends and colleagues, including attorney Matthew Richards and some of the former company employees who now stood by her side. There were reporters and activists at this trial, all watching what was happening. The country held its breath, waiting for the truth. When the judge announced the decision, there was an uproar in the hall. Westfield Corp. Was found guilty of violating labor rights and racial discrimination laws. Mr. Harris was suspended and now faces criminal investigation for violating employee rights, including intentional discrimination and pressuring employees. Tamara felt a heavy weight lifted off of her. Not only her personal struggle, but the struggles of many other women and Black employees were finally recognized. Mr. Harris could no longer control her life and the lives of her coworkers. She and all who had suffered could now be proud that justice had been served. After the verdict and public acknowledgement of the truth, Tamara began receiving offers from other organizations willing to work with her to create more inclusive workspaces. Her story became an inspiration to more and more people, and she continued to receive media attention. For Tamara herself, this moment became a point of reference. She was no longer a woman humiliated at work. She became a person who won despite all the difficulties. This moment was not only a victory for her personally, but also for all those who were in the same situation and did not know where to turn. She was now a voice that was heard. Standing in front of the mirror on the day her fate was decided, Tamara realized that her struggle had not only resulted in a victory in court, but had also opened up a new life. She was not the woman who once feared losing her job and suffered invisible discrimination. She became a symbol of strength and resilience. She could now be proud of herself for not giving up, for going all the way, despite all the obstacles. Her life has truly changed. She rebuilt her career and brought attention to an important issue. But even more importantly, she had shown her son Malik that the fight for justice is never in vain. He was proud of his mom, and when she looked into his eyes, she saw in them the confidence that the world really could change. Thus ended her journey, a journey from the shadow of oppression and despair to the light of justice and victory. But for Tamara, it was not the end, but only the beginning. Now she knew that in order to change something, one must not only dream, but also act. And most importantly, never give up. Thank you for your attention and for letting this story be a part of your day. Take care of yourself and your loved ones. See you again.